أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another one of our Mizan live sessions. Inshallah, everyone is doing well. Like always, we're going to continue, inshallah, with the topic that we have been discussing, and that is the topic of the rulings of the conditions of prayer. So, for those who have been with us since the beginning of the inception of this topic, we started out discussing basically the conditions of the place that you're going to pray, the timing of your prayer, also the clothing of your prayer. So those were some of the things that we discussed when we started out. And then we hit the idea of wudu and ghusl and tayammum and wudu jabira. So these four topics were the four topics that we started to delve into in our last session. So like always, feel free to leave your comments, your questions. If you have a question that has to do with an ahkam question that you have after the session is over, then you can go ahead and just send us a message, send Mizan Institute a message, and inshallah we can take the question and see if we can inshallah come up with the answer for that. So we were discussing wudu, ghusl, tayammum, and wudu jabira. Last week I explained a little bit of a difference between these four different types of taharat. We went through the differences between wudu and wudu jabira and tayammum and wudu, these three in particular last week. And we went through some rulings that had to do with wudu. So if you were watching last week, it was a session where we went through, I think, 13 to 14 different rulings. But the reason why we moved so fast was because these were rulings that we were pretty much familiar with already. Rulings that we know pretty much, but they're a little detailed, and so we just wanted to mention them and move on. So like always, we're going to do a quick review, inshallah, and after the review, we'll move on to the new content that we want to cover for today, which basically has to do with the mustahabbat of ghusl. What are the things that are mustahab for ghusl? And then touching the names of Allah or the Quran and when you have to have wudu for that, and a number of rulings that come up in that regard. And after that, inshallah, we'll move on to the rulings that have to do with tayammum as well. Okay, so let me do a quick review of last session. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who's with us. Very nice to have you guys, Brother Askari and Sister Safinas in particular. Thank you for being with us. Let me just pull up the notes here. Okay, so last week we started out, we said that we explained when you're supposed to do tayammum instead of wudu, and when you're supposed to do wudu jabira instead of wudu. So I'm going to go through those two later on in the session again, so I'm not going to review those right now. We'll review those in the middle of the session, basically. But those were very important rulings, but we'll get to that. So first point that we mentioned is that when we talk about wudu, there's two types of wudu. There's the normal wudu, which they call it tartibi, and then there's irtimasi wudu. Irtimasi wudu is basically, instead of washing your hands or your face, what you do is you allow water to just you hold your head or your face or your arm under the water, and the water just goes over your hand, basically, instead of wiping your hand or your arm, I should say. So that's irtimasi wudu. We said that sometimes it makes your job easier, especially if you have like tap water running. You can just pull your arm under it, and that would be your wudu. Or you could do the same thing with your face. But the important point we mentioned there was that even with irtimasi wudu, you have to make sure that the water is moving upward, basically downwards, right? From the top to the bottom of your face. Okay, and we mentioned there a point that we don't have to get too technical and, oh, this water went up over here and it came down over there. No, as long as orfan and based on the common view, normal people consider you washing your face from up downwards, then that wudu is going to be a valid wudu. Okay, so that was irtimasi wudu. We started to mention some of the rulings we have regarding both irtimasi and normal wudu. These rulings would apply. So ruling number one was that obviously you can't have a barrier when you're doing wudu, in the sense that you can't have anything stopping the water from getting to your skin. Okay, so that seems pretty simple and easy. A couple rulings here. Number one is that if you have a doubt about whether something is a barrier or is not a barrier, you would have to remove it. So in the case of a doubt, you would have to take precautions. This is Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling in this regard. So that's number one. Ayatollah Sistani does add that if it's, if your doubt is reasonable, if it's not reasonable, then you don't have to worry about it. Reasonable in the sense that like normal people doubt about such a thing. There are people who, for example, they might go outside, come back in the car, or come back home and say, oh, I got dust on my hands, and now this dust might be an obstacle of, and that's not a reasonable type of doubt, right? But for example, let's say you have some ink on your hand, or you have, for example, maybe it might even be makeup for the sisters, in the case of it not being shown in the presence of non-mahram. Obviously, if it's shown in the presence of non-mahram, that would be haram. But let's say with their partner and their spouse, for example, right? These are reasonable doubts, where the doubt of that thing being a barrier is a reasonable doubt. So Ayatollah Sistani said, yes, you would have to remove it in that case. However, regarding ink in particular, right, and the different types of colorings that we use or that are used, Ayatollah Khamenei and Ayatollah Sistani both have this in their istifta'at, that as long as you wash off the ink and the actual mass and substance is removed, the color that remains is not going to create a problem for your wudu. Okay, so we read the rulings last week about this. This would apply for situations where, for example, a brother or sister wants to color their hair or their beard, for the brothers, for example. And it also applies if you have like, ink of a pen on your hand, which is a very common thing. With regards to nail polish, we mentioned that because it's zina, it's not allowed to wear it in front of non-mahram. But if it's not an obstacle for wudu, then it's okay. But I haven't ever come across something like that. We did mention that apparently there are some water permeable. Some of the guys helped us out with that terminology last week. Types of nail polish. If the water really gets to the skin, then that's a different situation, and that would be permissible. Again, not in front of non-mahram. That would be haram. Okay, so that's ruling number one, no barriers. Ruling number two, if your skin is showing from under your facial hair, then you have to wash your skin. If it's not showing, then you can wash just based off, you can just wash basically the whatever appears from your facial hair. You don't have to get the water to your skin. And if you have a doubt, you do have to get the water to your skin. Now, about doubts, we'll explain, and we talked a little bit about it last session, and we'll talk more about it this session as well, that these doubts, brothers and sisters, these doubts, if you see that these doubts are getting more and more frequent and they're becoming more and more common, then you need to get, basically, you need to reach out and learn the rulings, right? And we'll talk about some of the rulings that come up here. And I mentioned this last week, and this is just because of my personal experience and having been, having talked to different people about this issue. A lot of times people are, in fact, they're not supposed to be paying attention to these doubts that they have, like shara'an, they're not supposed to be paying attention to it. And they're actually kathir shak, but they don't know the ruling, right? So they assume that they have to continue being in that state where they pay attention to their doubts. So if the doubts become too often, that's a problem, and we'll talk about that later on. Ruling number 3 was that if you're washing your arms or your hands and accidentally you go upwards or with your face, that's not a problem, not going to create a problem for your wudu. Number 4, we said that you have to have enough water on your hands or your face, that people would say, hey, he's washing it, he's not wiping it, right? Because wiping, masih, is for the head and for the feet, not for the face and for the arms. Number 5 was that you can wash up to 2 times. Washing once is wajib. Washing twice is mustahab. 3 times is not allowed. It's haram. But we said technically that never happens, because when you're washing, 2 things have to happen. First of all, you have to make an intention. And number 2 is that all of your hand has to be, water has to get to all of it, right? So no one really, as far as I've seen, no one really does more than once. I mean, I feel like 90% of people just do it once. And then some people might do it twice just because specifically they know it's mustahab. No one's gonna go 3 times really, so not too much of an issue there. Number 6, mash, and this one is an important ruling. Mash has to be done with the water remaining in the hands from washing the face and the arms. Okay, so we mentioned here that 2 rulings come up here. First of all, if someone is going to do a long mash, right, which is a very common thing, and if they get the hand, if they do their mash from the top all the way to the front, and then the wetness from their face gets onto their hand, and then with that they go to do a mash of their feet, that will create a problem for their wudu. That was one point to remember. Second point to remember is that if your hands do become dry, you can't just get water from anywhere. And as far as I can remember, Rastani says you have to get it from your beard. If you can't get it from the beard, then you have to start redoing your wudu. So that's another ruling. Number 7 was that mash needs to be done on a dry place. This is technically coming from the meaning of the word mash itself. Like when the scholars discuss this, they say, hey, mash is done when the place that you're doing mash on it, it's dry. So when I'm doing mash, it has to be dry. Now, we said that if it's a little moist, that's not a problem, as long as when you do the mash, the water on your hand leaves some sort of a mark or effect on your on the place that you're doing mash on. Then that would be enough. So it doesn't have to be like, you know, a whole lot of water. This is again one of those places that a lot of people might have a lot of doubts. Speaking from personal experience. Number 8, I believe it is, that mash has to be, yes, when you're doing mash, you don't have to do it actually on your skull unless your hair is long. Then you either have to do it on the roots of your hair or on the skull. Number 9, when you're doing mash, the mash should start from the tip of the toes, not from the top of the toes. Something that happens very often. We actually had a question about that not just too long ago from one of the brothers who'd sent in a message. Number 10, a person should do wudu himself. So as far as a person can do the things in wudu himself, that's not a problem. He has to do it. But if someone just wants to pour water in your hand, so then you can pour the water on your arm, that would not be an issue. But other than that, everything else you would have to take care of and you would have to do. Number 11 has to do with situations where I have a doubt whether I have wudu or not, right? It's time for salat. I don't know. Do I have wudu or did I not do wudu, right? If that's the doubt you have, then you do not have wudu, or you have to act as if you do not have wudu, which means you have to go and do wudu again. However, if you flip the scenario and you say, no, I'm dealing with a situation where I know I did wudu, I don't know if it became batil or not, right? Then, and again, that's another place that people have a whole lot of doubts. If you made wudu and you're not sure whether it became batil or not, then you can act as if you did have wudu. The only downside to that is that if later on you do find out that you didn't have wudu, then obviously any prayer that you prayed, you would have to redo it. And number 13, we talked about being kathir al-shak. So I want to expand on this just a little bit, and inshallah we'll move on to the rest of the rulings that we want to discuss in today's session. So when these maraji say kathir al-shak, there's a particular criterion that they've mentioned, and then they've also mentioned a general criteria. So and a lot of people, sometimes people even who know ahkam, they mistake these two with one another. They assume that the marja is saying that if this specific criteria applies to your situation, then you're kathir al-shak, otherwise you're not. Whereas the marja is saying that this specific criteria, would definitely make you kathir shak. And also the general criteria will also make you kathir shak as well. So let me explain what I mean, because I'm talking a little bit in vague terms. So the specific criteria that they mentioned, for example, for Ayatollah Khamenei, is having 3 doubts in 3 consecutive prayers, or having 3 doubts in 1 prayer, right? Ayatollah Sistani's is a little different. His ruling has changed on this actually recently. But anyways, this is the specific ruling that they mentioned, that, hey, if this happens to you, then you're definitely kathir shak. However, they also mention that if someone is in a situation where they're just having frequent doubts, right? And the doubts are so frequent to a point that people say, hey, you're having too many doubts, then this person is also considered kathir shak. So it's both, in the sense that, my point by saying both is that if either of these applies to your situation, then you are kathir shak. Being kathir shak does not mean that, you know, God forbid, your life is paralyzed and then, okay, now I'm kathir shak. No, that's not how it works, right? Being kathir shak means if I'm in a situation where I'm having so many doubts that normal people are, you know, looking at me and saying, oh, his life is really making his life difficult, right? Or he's having a lot of doubts, that is going to be considered, that person, his situation is going to be considered kathir shak. So what do you do when you are kathir shak? When you're kathir shak, you don't pay attention to any of your doubts anymore. So what does that mean? Like, in every situation, we're just applying this ruling. Otherwise, the ruling is pretty simple. So, for example, if I had a doubt about my wudu, even if I'm still doing the wudu right there, I don't have to pay attention anymore to the doubts that I have. If I'm in my salat, I don't know, did I do the recitation properly or not? Did I do the sad in Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim properly or not, right? You don't have to pay attention to any of these. Even in the raka'at of salat, if someone is kathir shak, then when they have a doubt about the raka'at, they will always assume that they already did that rakat. Unless their doubt is between a situation like 4 and 5 making their salat batil, then for a kathir shak, he would say, no, I did 4. So basically, whatever makes life the easiest in every situation, right? In a doubt between 3 and 4 for a kathir shak, he's always going to go with 4, as if he already did those actions, right? When it comes to wudu, if I have doubt, for example, this one is a very common one, where I don't know if my wudu became batil or not, then you will have to assume that your wudu is not batil, and you still have wudu. So this is what it means to be kathir shak. I mentioned last week, and I'll repeat this week, that if you feel like you're dealing with that situation, you have to start disregarding your doubts right now, because that is not something to mess around with. Having frequent doubts can turn into a very scary thing very quickly. Okay, so that's what we discussed in the previous session. Let me just take a look, see in case we have any questions about the previous session. Assalamu alaikum to everybody who's joined us. Very nice to have you guys with us. Okay, so let's move on to what we want to cover for today, and start out with one particular point. I hope this ruling doesn't create a lot of problem for you guys. If you're a follower of Ayatollah Sistani, then it won't. If you're a follower for Ayatollah Khamenei, maybe a little bit. And that is this: when someone is doing wudu, the intention, basically, let me explain the ruling like this. So there's a discussion amongst the fuqaha and amongst the scholars that if you're going to do wudu for something that its time is going to come later, for example, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to do wudu for dhuhr, which is like 3 hours from now, right? Can I do wudu with the intention of that salat? Ayatollah Sistani says yes, doesn't matter when you're doing it, that's fine. Ayatollah Khamenei says no, if you're doing it with the intention of I'm doing wudu for dhuhr namaz, you have to be close to the time of dhuhr namaz, maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that. If it's like 5 hours before dhuhr namaz, you can't do wudu with the intention of dhuhr namaz particularly. So what do? You just have to change your intention. It's very simple. Say, I'm going to do wudu with the intention of just having taharat. And then you can use your wudu for anything that you want. So let me know if that ruling is clear. I feel like that might be a little confusing for some of us. At-Sistani, as I mentioned, he doesn't have that ruling. So he says doesn't matter when you're doing wudu. Even if it's 5 hours before the namaz, you can do intention that I'm doing wudu for that particular namaz, and that's not a problem. Okay, some of the mustahabbat of wudu. Number 1 is that you say Bismillah when you start. Number 2 is brushing your teeth. Number 3 is that you take up water with both hands before you start. Number 4 is, I forgot what they call it because it's not gargling, but basically, rinsing your mouth. There you go. Rinsing your mouth with water before you start 3 times. And istinshaq as well, which is passing water through the nose 3 times as well. These are all mustahab. And then, there's that famous famous dua, right? I don't know how I could explain this, or maybe I could just paste it in the comments section. This dua is, it's a famous dua, but it's really beautiful. Like, for example, it says when you come to see the water even, then the moment you see the water that you're going to do wudu with, then you say Bismillah wa billah walhamdulillah alladhi ja'ala al-ma'a tahuran wa lam yaj'alhu najasa. You thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he made water tahir and he didn't make it najis, which is a pretty obvious thing, but that's the point of it. Like, things that we take for granted, we're supposed to pray for, and we're supposed to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. So maybe, I don't know, I have to check, see if I can put this maybe in the comments section, or if one of the brothers from our team are watching and they could just search it up and put it in the comment section, that would be great. But it's a really beautiful dua, and every part of the dua that continues, it has to do with whatever part you're doing, and it has just particular points regarding that part, right? So like when you're washing your right arm, it says Allahumma a'tini kitabi bi yamini, give me my book of deeds with my right hand, because we know that on Yawmul Qiyamah, those who have done a good job, basically, their book is given to them, or their book of deeds is given to them with their right hand, for example. And it continues. So I don't want to go too much into that, but it's a famous dua that many people have in their houses even. Okay, so let me move on. Let's talk about things that we have to have wudu in order to touch them, right? And obviously the first thing that comes to mind is the Quran, but on other things that also sometimes we might have to have wudu for touching has to do with the names of the prophets, the names of the imams. These are things that we have to discuss. I'm not saying that these are the rulings. And also, what are we supposed to do when children, for example, are touching the Quran? Do we have to stop them? What if a child is playing with the Quran? Is it necessary to stop them? And how do you deal with these holy names, right? Like, for example, someone gives you a brochure that has a verse of the Quran on it. What are you supposed to do with that verse of the Quran, right? People collect them. Many know that, it might not be a good idea to throw them away. But they collect them, and a lot of times they don't know what to do with them. It's just sitting there. So these are some of the rulings that we're going to discuss. So let's start from here. First of all, we know that touching verses of the Quran without wudu is haram. That's pretty much unanimous. And but touching the cover and in between the lines, and if you want to be clever and just flip pages with the tip of your fingertips and that kind of stuff, which I think we're all guilty of at one point or another, that's fine, but it's makruh. So that's the ruling with regards to that. Now, if the verses that I am dealing with, for example, the Quran that I'm dealing with, if it has a cover on it, be it I don't know, a glass cover, a plastic cover, whatever the case may be, then you don't have to really have to have wudu. And based on that, the Quran apps that we have on our phones, obviously, as far as I know, that would apply, right? Especially if you have a cover on it anyways. So that's the ruling with regards to those. I'm going to mention something, it might seem a little random for some of you guys, but I've had people ask me this question, that if we have Quran apps on our phone, and can we just throw our phone around and that kind of stuff? And this is all urfi. If the common view sees it as disrespecting the Quran, then no, you can't do that. As far as I know, the common view does not consider that disrespecting the Quran, so it's not really a problem in that regard. Some people have asked that question before, so I thought I might share it with you guys. So touching the cover and the sides and all that stuff, not haram, but it is makruh. If a child picks up the Quran, right, and wants to touch it or wants to play with it or that kind of stuff, Ayatollah Sistani says you don't have to stop the child, as long as what the child is doing does not constitute disrespect. So like if people see what the child is doing, they don't say, oh, the Quran is being disrespected. So if a child goes, right, and starts ripping up a Quran, then yeah, I mean, that's, people would say, oh, like, this is disrespect. Not disrespect from the child, disrespect in the general sense that the Quran is being ripped up. Otherwise, the child doesn't understand what he or she is doing. So they say you have to stop him in that case. But other than that, touching the Quran without wudu for the children, that's not a problem, in the sense that parents don't have to stop it from happening. Okay, so that's the Quran. It's pretty clear. And when we talk about the Quran, even if the phrases are not in the actual book, obviously if it's being quoted somewhere else in Arabic, then obviously that also cannot be touched either. And as far as I know, this does not apply to the translation. It's just the Arabic verses of the Quran. So like if you're reading a brochure, right, and it's about Imam Mahdi, and it says وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, that's copy paste there, then obviously you can't touch that. Let me just check. I think we had a question that had come in. Yes, I think Brother Hussein Ali has pasted. Let me just check, make sure Brother Hussein posted the right one. Yeah, there you go. It's the right one. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Brother Amir is asking, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam. Can wudu be done in a moving vehicle such as a car, airplane, or ship? Yes, there's no problem. You can do wudu in all of those situations that you mentioned. Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's continue. So that has to do with the Quran. Let's move on to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is where things get a little tricky. Okay. The name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll mention what Ayatollah Sistani's ruling is on this, and then Ayatollah Khamenei. So Ayatollah Sistani has quite a bit of an interesting ruling. He says the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the specific attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are things that you have to touch with wudu. He says, according to Ihtiyat Wajib, even if they're in other languages. So, if you find the word God somewhere, you would have to touch that with wudu, right? And that struck me as surprising when I read the ruling initially, but that is his ruling. But it is Ihtiyat Wajib, right? And similar thing applies also to his special attributes. When I say his special attributes, that means attributes that we specifically use for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or attributes that are used and we know they're referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if in a text it says the Almighty, for example, right, or the All-Merciful, or the All-Knowing, and it's clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is meant by these, then he says also those in any language cannot be touched without wudu. However, like I mentioned, this is Ihtiyat Wajib. So it is possible to refer to the ruling of other maraji. As far as I've looked, and as far as I've searched, I haven't found Ayatollah Khamenei saying that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in other languages has to be touched with wudu. Yes, in Arabic, they have that, obviously. In Arabic, his name and his specific attributes like Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, I don't know, Ar-Razzaq, these types of attributes that we know is referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has that you have to touch these with wudu as well. But in other languages, as far as I could search, I wasn't able to find anything like that. So technically you could not apply to him. You could refer to him, and that would be okay. If someone does have Allah as part of their name, like their name is Abdullah, right? Then yes, that Abdullah, that Allah, you would have to touch with wudu, and the rulings that we just discussed would apply in that situation. So just because it's part of someone's name doesn't make it different. Because when they say Abdullah, basically the reason why they use that name is this is the servant of God. I was gonna say the son of God, the servant of God, which basically they're using the word Allah in the meaning that we use it in. Therefore, it's the name of God, basically. Okay. So that's with regards to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When it comes to the names of the Imams and the Prophets, it flips over. Ayatollah Sistani has the easier ruling, and Ayatollah Khamenei has a little bit more of a difficult ruling. Ayatollah Khamenei says, Ihtiyat wajib, you can't touch the names of the Prophets, the Imams, and Lady Fatima salawatullahi alayha, whom we are commemorating her martyrdom these days. But Ayatollah Sistani says this is all ihtiyat mustahab, so it's better not to. So if you want to refer from Ayatollah Khamenei to Ayatollah Sistani, then you can do that. So to summarize these two rulings that I mentioned, if in one of them you refer from Ayatollah Sistani to Ayatollah Khamenei and the other one from Ayatollah Khamenei to Ayatollah Sistani, what ends up happening is the only thing that you definitely have to stay away from is touching the name of God in Arabic. The name of God and his specific attributes in Arabic. That's the part that everyone agrees on that needs to be touched with wudu. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Okay, so I'll continue. The next thing that we have to discuss is dealing with these, things that have the verses of the Quran or holy names on them, the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the names of the Imams or the Prophets. What are we supposed to do with those things, right? Which they call asma mutabarrika, right? So pretty much the ruling as a whole is you have to get rid of these in a way that's not considered disrespect, okay? So if I want to put them aside somewhere, let's not go there, but let me explain it this way. So for example, a couple places that they do mention, you can throw them, for example, in running water, if that's not considered disrespect, which I don't think it would be. Or you can bury them, which is a more difficult part. Or like Ayatollah Sistani says, you can change the word so that they change into a different word, for example. Or you can remove the writings with chemicals. What I would suggest, and this is just based on my own understanding, shredding them would probably be the best way to go about it, in the sense that you remove that word from being that word anymore. Is it considered disrespect? If you this is a subjective thing, and it's based on the orphan, it's based on the common view, so you guys might disagree with me. I wouldn't consider that to be disrespecting these names and these. It might be a verse of the Quran, for example. But yeah, if someone does consider that disrespecting, then they would not be able to do that. But the ruling here is very broad. A lot of times people think that we have specific rulings about these issues, whereas the rulings are very broad and general, in the sense that they say, hey, as long as you're not disrespecting them, then you can dispose of them in any way that you can. The only way that they do have an issue with is burning. They say that that's not allowed. But other than that, that would fine. Someone might even argue, putting them for, to be recycled, for example, in a separate bin for recycling, like paper or whatever. That may not be even disrespect. It's subjective. Different people might have different understandings on it. Like I said, I think shredding might be a good idea. Someone might disagree and say, no, that would be considered disrespect. But that's just, like I said, it's a subjective issue. Yes. Okay. So that's all we have to discuss with regards to these holy names that we were discussing. Yes. So Sister Safina's is asking the same question that we just answered. What about recycling those papers? If you ask me, that wouldn't be considered. That's not considered. You're not throwing it in the trash, right? Maybe in a separate, papers only, whatever. These days, when you go in the airport, there's so many different options when you want to throw away a piece of trash. I've literally come across these trash cans and just stood there, just not knowing what to do. It's one of the very few times in my life where I just feel lost, completely lost. There's a one for paper, and then there's one for aluminum, and then there's one for this, and you have like a, I don't know, you bought some coffee or whatever, and you don't even know what this is made of. You don't know what to put your cup of coffee into. Anyways, yeah, the recycling, if it's for like a separate thing, I don't think it would be considered disrespecting. So, but again, like I said, it's subjective, and it's up to you guys to make that judgment call. Okay, so we're gonna move on. Now here I want to discuss, we're gonna get on to tayammum because now we're done with wudu. If anyone has any questions with regards to wudu, you can go ahead and send them in because we won't be going back to wudu. So when are you supposed to do tayammum? We discussed this in the previous session. I'm gonna go over it quickly. And then I will also explain when you are supposed to do wudu jabira, okay? So, tayammum, I would say probably in 4 different situations. Number 1, you don't have water. And when you don't have water, it either means there's no water at all, there is water, you don't have access to it, you need the water to drink, or you need the water to wash your clothes because it's najis. It covers all 4 of those. So that's number 1. Number 2, the water is bad for you, or using it will create a lot of problems for you. That's number 2. Number 3 is not having enough time, which we will discuss more in detail. And number 4 is if you have something on your skin that absolutely cannot be removed. Whatever you do, this this object cannot be removed. That's when you have to do tayammum. Okay. Now, before I go into the details with regards to the rulings regarding tayammum, there's one situation where we have to do wudu jabira. If you don't do wudu jabira, then your salat is batil in these situations. What situation is that? It has 2 conditions. Both of those conditions have to be there. Number 1, if there is a major cut or boil or a broken bone that has a cast on it. That's number 1. And number 2 is the water is bad for your cut, or you just simply cannot remove the cover that you have, as in the case of a broken, limb, right? Broken bone, I should say. So if both of those are there, you're supposed to do wudu jabira. Now, there are situations, the ruling's a little bit more detailed than that, but I don't want to go into it because it will make life difficult to figure out when you're supposed to do wudu jabira and when you're supposed to do tayammum. The simple way to do it is this, that if you're dealing with a cut, there's something on it, just do wudu tayammum and, forgive me, not wudu tayammum, wudu jabira and tayammum. Okay, if you have a cut, just do both and make your life easy. And that'll save us a lot of time. So the rulings get very detailed, and we don't want to go into all of those rulings. So hopefully it's clear that in certain situations you're supposed to do wudu jabira, but just do wudu jabira and tayammum just to be safe, basically. Okay, so I'm gonna move on from there. Let's move on to tayammum. Let's cover some of the rulings with regards to tayammum. Let me just check in case we have any more questions. Okay, so I'll continue. First of all, what can you do tayammum on? Okay, what can you do tayammum on? Rastani says you can do tayammum on dirt or anything that's considered part of the earth. Okay, now this does not apply to plants and trees and grass. So it's not similar to sajda, because when we do sajda, that's the ruling they mention. They say you can do sajda on dirt or anything on the earth or anything that comes from the earth, right? Which we will discuss when we come to the rulings of salat. Inshallah, when we discuss the rulings of salat, we'll discuss also a little bit of the secrets of salat and a little bit of the philosophy of the movements that we have in salat. That's a topic that I've found to be really interesting for people, and it's really interesting how even our youth sometimes, when you explain the secrets of salat and a little bit of the connection between the symbols, like the symbolic movements, and the meaning behind them, it really connects, it really makes a lot of sense to them. So when we get to salat, inshallah, I think in max 1 or 2 sessions, we'll discuss salat, the rulings of salat, and then also the philosophy behind the movements as well. And that's something I suggest everyone to definitely teach your kids or nieces or nephews or whoever you have who's growing up, because when you're growing up, it's uh, like you don't understand everything. You may not be as mature at a younger age, so it's difficult to connect with things. But once you understand the philosophy behind these symbolic movements, then it kind of makes sense. Kind of makes more sense to you. Okay. Anyways, going on a tangent there. So what can you do tayammum on? You can do tayammum on dirt or anything that's considered part of the earth, like stones and rocks, and clay would also apply. Obviously, you can't do tayammum on, like, you know, glass or plastic or even metals that they get from the earth, or I don't know, that type of stuff. You can't do that. Or on fabric, you can't do that. Or on plants or leaves, you can't do tayammum on those things. Dust that's similar, sand would also be something you can do tayammum on, by the way. Dust that has gathered enough that it's like dirt, that would be allowed. But if it's light dust, according to Ayatollah Sistani, he says that's not allowed unless you don't have access to dirt, which doesn't happen that often as far as I know. Okay. Important point for the stones is that you can do tayammum any type of stone as long as it's not, like, you know, one of those very valuable stones that they use for zinat, right? So if it's like firuza, for example, you can use it. I don't know what the English terminology is for these, but if it's those types of stones, then it would not be allowed. Okay. Ayatollah Sistani does have this ruling. I'm just going to mention this and move on. He says that whatever you're using, it has to have like this type of dirt quality, that when you put your hands on it, or I shouldn't say put your hands, but actually tap your hands on it, a little bit of it should stick to your hand. That's ihtiyat wajib, and Ayatollah Khamenei does not have that, so don't worry about that. Okay. Let me just explain how we're supposed to do tayammum, and if you guys have any questions with regards to tayammum, inshallah we'll take those and we can end afterwards, inshallah. So how do you do tayammum? Believe it or not, how to do tayammum is actually a question that a lot of people, I don't know, as far as I know, they will struggle with, because it is sometimes a little it can get a little complicated. Okay, so how are we supposed to do tayammum? The parts that need to be wiped in tayammum is the forehead, but also consisting of the two sides of the forehead, not just the front, and the eyebrows, and that's it pretty much, right? You could add the top of the nose as well, but the rest of the face is not wajib. Okay, so what am I gonna do? First, I'm gonna get something that I can do tayammum on, like dirt, or one of the things that we talked about before. If you have stone in your house, you can go ahead and do it on that, which probably might be the easiest option. And important point is, you're gonna tap your hands on that dirt or whatever, that stone. You're not supposed to just put it. No, you're supposed to tap it. Tap it twice, and you put it on your forehead. Now, when you're gonna put it on your forehead, here's the thing. Similar to wudu, because usually when you're doing tayammum, you're doing tayammum instead of wudu. But regardless, similar to wudu, you are going to do your movement has to be downwards always, right? Like the same way in wudu we say you have to wash downwards, you can't go upwards. Same thing applies in tayammum as well. So what am I gonna do? And obviously sometimes you have hair that's getting in front of you. What you can do is you can pull your hands up under your hair just like this before you're gonna start. And the important thing is you should start with your palms. But my point is, you can pull up your hair, and when you're doing this movement, you shouldn't have the intention that your tayammum has started, because you're moving upwards. But once your palms hit the the beginning of where your hair starts to grow, then from that point you go downwards all the way to your eyebrow. You can go to your right and to your left, and then you can go on your nose as well. And I believe that's mustahab from what I can remember. That's the first part. Now, Ayatollah Khamenei has, we'll get to that in just a second. What you're supposed to do next is then you hold your right hand straight, and you take your left hand right over it, right? Same thing with your left hand, and your hand should not be moving. And obviously you're going to do it on the outside of your hand. Then Ayatollah Khamenei has ihtiyat. He says, listen, tap it one more time. Boom, boom. And you are going to do this one more time. So basically, you're going to wipe each hand twice according to Ayatollah Khamenei. As far as I can remember, that's ihtiyat, but just do it just to be, on the safe side. I can't remember, honestly, if Ayatollah Sistani has that same ihtiyat or not. But just if we just do it, then that would be, preferable because we'll be on the safe side. Okay, so I've done tayammum. Now that I'm done with tayammum, there is just one ruling that I have to mention before we end, inshallah. We said that if you don't have time to do your tayammum, then, if you don't have time to do your namaz, then you would have to do tayammum. In the sense that if you go and you do wudu or ghusl, it's going to take too long, then you should be doing tayammum instead, because tayammum obviously should take you less time. Honestly, if tayammum is taking more time than wudu and ghusl, then that means you're probably kathir al-shak. But if I don't have time, I'm going to go and do tayammum instead of wudu and ghusl. And then, here's the important thing. He says, even if you have a doubt. So like a lot of times you wake up in the morning, you don't know, if I go and do wudu or ghusl right now, would I have enough time to pray? All of my prayer be before the time of qada? He says, even if you have a doubt, not him, Ayatollah Khamenei as well, they both say, even if you have a doubt, you should end up doing tayammum instead of wudu or ghusl. All right. So that's everything that we have. This is tayammum. We're done with tayammum. If you guys have any particular questions with regards to tayammum or ghusl, because we've covered both of those now, you can guys send them in. Inshallah, in the next session, we'll discuss ghusl and the rulings that we have with regards to ghusl. And that's another place that a lot of people have a lot of different doubts. Unfortunately, it has to be clarified. And then from that, inshallah, we'll delve into the rulings with regards to salat itself. We'll discuss those rulings as well. All right. So I don't see any questions coming in. Just a couple points. Inshallah, Shaykh Amin will be with you guys tomorrow night, and he will be continuing with his, his discussion with regards to Shia Imamiyya doctrine. Yes. Okay. We have a question. I'll get to that in just a second. And alhamdulillah, we will be having the course in Atlanta happen last week. Alhamdulillah, the Barzakh, Death in Barzakh course. And alhamdulillah, great reception there as well. I believe, I'm not sure if the pictures are up on the Facebook page yet or not, but you guys can check those out. And also another course we have coming up in Austin, I believe. Very shortly, inshallah. Hopefully in March and in April we'll also have more courses going on, the tafsir course as well. So we have two questions here. One is from Sister Shermeen. Well, three actually. So Sister Shermeen is asking, can you please show the face cleaning of a tayammum again? So, well, let me just take off my ammam, it'll be easier. My point was, basically, you'll forgive my hair, doesn't look nice enough. Basically, you're going to take your palms after you tapped it twice on whatever the dirt was or whatever. Then you're going to take your palms, you can just move it up like this, so that you move up this front part of your hair, right? If there's hair here or whatever. And then you just come down just like this. Then you can go to the right, you can go to the left, and then you move with the rest down. That's it. The only area that's actually wajib for us to do tayammum or whatever is the forehead on this side, the forehead, the front, the sides, and the eyebrows, pretty much, and the top of the nose. That's it. You don't have to do all the way to the rest. That's all mustahab. And if someone's having so many doubts, oh, did I do it exactly to where my hair was growing, and that means that person is having too many doubts, and at that point you're not supposed to be considering those doubts. So that would be the answer to your question, Sister Shermeen. Brother Asad is asking, if you do tayammum in place of ghusl of time, do you then need to do ghusl afterwards? Oh, sorry, because of time. My bad. If you do, yes, very good question. If you do tayammum instead of ghusl or wudu, and then later on you have more time, right? Like for example, the next prayer has come up, but you do have a chance to go and do wudu and ghusl at that point. Yes, for the next prayers or any other obligation that would need wudu or ghusl, you would have to go and do wudu and ghusl, unless you still don't have water, for example, or your excuse is still there. But if it's just time, then obviously you would have time to do wudu or ghusl. Sister Safinas is asking, what about the niyyah? Do we need to mention why we are doing tayammum in place of, or what we're doing tayammum in place of? So like, for example, are we doing tayammum in place of wudu, or are we doing tayammum in place of ghusl? No, just as long as you know that you're doing wudu, tayammum in the place of wudu or ghusl, that would be sufficient, inshallah. And salams to Sister Sana, who has joined us now. All right, so that's it for today. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum also to Brother Dawood. Thank you very much for being with us. Inshallah, we will continue with our sessions next Tuesday. I will be with you guys, and like I mentioned, next Tuesday we'll discuss the issue of ghusl and the rulings that we have there, and moving on after that, we'll most probably move into salat. Maybe we might jump to the rulings with regards to Jama'at prayers, just because people have so many questions with regards to that. But we'll see, inshallah. And if you guys have a preference, you guys can let us know in the comments, or send us a message and let us know about that. Thank you very much. Inshallah, we'll see you guys in the next session. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.